Morning. Good morning to everybody.
Bonjour tout le monde. Good.
Thank you very much, Mercy, for coming and attending this session. With this session, we'll be talking about businesses against corruption, on creating a culture of integrity. And to discuss this, we have, my name is Thomas. I come from Singapore, and I'm part of an organization called the ASEAN CSR Network, which is responsible for promoting responsible business practices in 10 countries of Southeast Asia. And joining me in this panel is, if I could just introduce to you, Mr. Stephen Fish, who is seated on the extreme left of mine, and Patrick Willocher. Sorry if I got his name wrong, he'll correct it after that. From La Poste in France, and Coleridge Chen Watanabe, from Thailand. He's from the Institute of Directors and responsible for a collective action program. So as words of introduction, I would just want to say a few words that throughout the world, we know that corruption is not only a national problem, it is a cross-border problem, it's an international concern. And it hampers what we call trying to get inclusive economic growth, prosperity for one. It's one of those that will stand in the way of realizing the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. So globally, the cost of corruption is very high. It is equal to about more than 5% of the global GDP, which is about $2.6 trillion, according to the World Economic Forum, and over $1 trillion a year is paid in bribes each year. $1 trillion is more than the GDP of most countries in the world. And then for businesses, 10% of all the cost of doing business in many parts of the world is taken away by bribery and corruption. And 25% of all the procurement, the buying of goods and services for most developing countries are also caused by corruption. But this is the high cost, and presenting this high cost, there's a very strong business case, both individually as a company and also collectively. Individually, I can put a long list about reducing the cost of doing business because it saves 25% of procurement, reduces legal and reputational risk because if you get caught, it's a great embarrassment. It helps to build trust and confidence. It attracts investments from ethically oriented investors. It attracts and retain highly disciplined and principled employees, therefore improves the morale of your company and retain. And it also gives you a competitive advantage, which is becoming preferred choice of ethically concerned customers and consumers. These are very classic examples. We have huge examples of companies and organizations. Collectively, if we all get together and tackle corruption together, it creates a level playing field for everyone. So it's not, you don't get business because you bribe and do the wrong things. It also improves trust. Today, trust is is eroding. And also, it influences our future laws, regulations, which could be done better with trust. So contributing to this panel is these three handsome gentlemen. Sorry, we did not have gender equality in this, gender balance in this group. Possibly the ladies are more disciplined and does not see this as, for various reasons. And let me just talk a little bit of Southeast Asia, where I come from. Southeast Asia, when we look at the corruption index and look at corruption, it's one of the biggest problems in our part of the world. We are today, in terms of population, we are the third largest grouping around the world. We are, in terms of economy, we are the seventh biggest economy, going to be the sixth in a few years' time. But if you look at corruption, except for Singapore, Brunei, the rest of them all scored below 50%. And we have the reputation of keeping towards the bottom of it. So as things, and majority of the cases that I want to prove belongs to the private sector. It's not just governments are corrupt, but today, just to give you a statistics from Singapore's Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, they said 90% of the cases they investigated over the last 2 years were private sector bribing private sector or private sector trying to bribe public sector. So it is a question of if we can manage and improve integrity in the private sector, we should be able to manage and contain part of the huge aspects of this corruption. In some of the Southeast Asian countries, the corrupt practices investigation people do not have authority to investigate private sector corruption. So some of the statistics doesn't come out. It's investigated by police, etc. So, but the leadership of the Southeast Asian countries have made a commitment that they want to have a culture of good governance, they want to enhance transparency, accountability, participatory, and good. So instilling a culture of integrity and corruption. It's very easy to say this. But if you look at our 10 countries in ASEAN, we have different forms of government. So there are one-party states. We have a country with absolute monarchy. We have military governments in power. We have a country that is going from military to democracy, but still military very powerful. And there are quasi-democracies, and there are countries that have elections every few years. So the whole spectrum is different. Geography is different. Indonesia with 250,000 people, 100,000 islands, 3 time zones compared to Singapore, which is just a small island, 700 square kilometers at low tide. High tide, we are smaller. Or Brunei, which is just 400,000 people. And the GDPs are different, from 52,000 for the top to 1,000 per annum. So instilling this character is difficult. But my organization, we have done a study together with the Singapore National University, looking at how businesses disclose corruption, or disclosures their measures on integrity. You find that our businesses are not that great. The best disclosure using Transparency International's framework, Thailand comes out number 1. That's why Colin is here. But the other countries that disclose, even then, it's not very fantastic. There are areas that they don't talk about it. We found that a lot of companies do not talk about whether these ethics rules applies to the directors. They don't talk about training. They don't talk about a few things. So there's still a lot of gaps there. But the good news is that there are countries that have got initiatives taking place. The businesses are taking the lead to address this issue. So in the Philippines, they got an initiative called Integrity Initiative. The Thais, they got Private Sector Collective Action, Coalition Against Corruption, which Colin will say a bit more. In Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, which Project 12 and Deal 12 are the key things. So there is a private sector drive for it. But what are the real problems that stops this corruption? If you ask them, the first challenge, they say, is what we call the first mover disadvantage. If everybody is corrupt and you're the only clean guy there, the chances are that you will not have the advantage of getting more business because you will lose out. So you resist competition. The other one is that in our part of the world, we love to give gifts. We think giving gifts is part of our culture. But when does the gift becomes a bribe? That's the question. And therefore, there's a misconception about gifts and bribes, and I think we are trying to address them. Finally, there's also this whole question of if you are clean, what are the incentives for cleanness? So there are problems, but we have not really come out. The only disincentive is things. But fortunately, there are things that's moving. I put up a lot list. Strangely, one of the biggest provisions and incentives for becoming clean in our part of the world for businesses is the UK Bribery Act and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of the US. And so these external things that if you get caught by these foreign things is true. And if I go and listen to talks given by our anti-corruption enforcement agencies, they say they share information They share intelligence across borders. So if you are highlighted as a company in one country, the agencies in all the other countries will know about you, and they will keep a watch out for you. The other incentive is the ASEAN blueprints, which talks about addressing, but fortunately the stock exchanges in Indonesia, Bursa Malaysia, the Singapore Stock Exchange, the Thai Stock Exchange are all coming up with rules on disclosures, on rules on that they should have more disclosure. More disclosure, transparency will result in more practices, evaluation of practices. And also, we want to talk about changing practices, expectations of stakeholders, and also the changing global things. So what are we trying to do to get things? One is to implement the UN Convention Against Corruption. This convention has been ratified by all 10 countries in Southeast Asia, but the implementation according to these conventions are not there. So I don't think we have still gaps in trying to talk about corporate liability, about facilitation payments, about laws. The other point that we try to do is promote and embed these principles of responsible business and CSR. That CSR is not about how you spend money. It's not just about charity and philanthropy. It's a question of how did you make that money. And therefore, we should then recognize good conduct, responsible practices, discourage bad practices, promote sustainability reporting, which is picking up, and work with stock exchanges and other civil society organizations. And to do this is my own organization in South. We were formed in December 2010 as part of the ASEAN intention to promote sustainable socio-economic development. So our vision is to have a responsible business community, making ASEAN the thing, and to mainstream responsible business throughout the whole countries. And we do it in three ways. One, we advocate. We try to build up a capacity. We do capacity building and measure collective action. One of the collective action missions that we do is against corruption. So we work with Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, 6 of the 10 countries to promote integrity. And the philosophy we use is called integrity has no borders. It's to create this big culture of integrity in ASEAN and business community. The goal is actually for businesses to say to no to corruption, regardless of where they are in ASEAN. So, if, for example, Singapore businesses, they are quite respectful of the law enforcement, so they are very careful. We are not bribed. But do they also do the same philosophy when they're outside the country? So similarly, there's the Thai companies in Thailand, when they operate outside, what sort of values do they carry? And so these are some of our website and some of the things that we try to push across. Finally, I'd like to say that for us to work, it's also a clear message that nobody can work on their own. We need to work collaboratively with governments, with civil society, and with businesses. Eventually, we want businesses to practice integrity, to mainstream integrity, for which you need high standards of ethics. So we need to do that. And a small step that we are trying to do within Southeast Asia now is to get our initiatives to come up with a regional integrity pledge. It's a pledge that it's a very simple first step that we will want to move on and to be on the standards of the UN Anti-Corruption Convention, and therefore we uphold ethical values both at all levels. So we have got this pledge to be signed, and we always encourage the companies to do it. So with these small remarks, I have just painted a small picture of Southeast Asia and what we are doing, as well as a broad one. Now, to come to some details, following maybe Colin, who will talk about the practice in Thailand, which is one of the countries of Southeast Asia, one of the most successful initiatives. He will share with you why. And then we will have Stephen, who will talk about the reach of technology and some of the other ideas of building trust. And finally, Patrick, on a real example of how a French company actually works on this. On this note, I will invite Colin to come here, and let me get his slides up as well. Oh, sorry. I think you have to go all the way. Yeah, thank you. This is yours.
So it's going to go up. Hello. Sawasdee krap. My name is Chen Watanabe. Please call me Colin. Thanks for having me here. Before I came to take a role at CAC, Anti-Corruption Coalition Against Corruption, I used to be partner at PwC on sustainability. So this conference is very close to my heart. I feel like I'm returning home. A little bit about myself. Thank you, 5 years ago, I went to become a monk, Buddhist monk. In Thailand, you can become a Buddhist monk for a month. It's like going back to school. And then after that, not only I found peace, but I found my own purpose. I came back to PwC and I resigned. At the time also, Thailand had a big conflict. Yellow shirt, red shirt, everything is about inequality. And in my Facebook, all my friends was writing, inequality, corruptions, that's the problem. So at the time, I didn't see anyone raise their hand. So I did. So that's why I'm here. So I'm going to talk to you about the journey of CAC, how it was born, how we grew, and what's next. Talking about corruptions in Thailand is pretty severe. Are you familiar with Corruption Perception Index? Okay. What is French? What is French in terms of ranking? Can you guess? Out of 176 countries, French is 23. And your score out of 100, you are 69. Thailand rank is 101. And our score is 35. So that's how bad it is. So 7 years ago, business community couldn't bear it anymore. They didn't want to wait for the government to do something. There were too many regulations, but no prosecutions. Might not sound familiar to you, but it's happening in Southeast Asia. So some of them got together. 7 years ago, we got around 23 companies to join and say, let's say no to bribery. But how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? How we are going to turn the business, which is part of the problem because we pay at the table, into part of the solution. If we were to compare corruption, corruption is like an evil. And evil loves to be in the dark, right? Evil wants to be in the dark. And in Thailand, everything we do is many things are in the dark. So let's set up a platform that is bright with the spotlight and ask the company that are ready, that are clean, to be in this spotlight and say, we are not going to bribe. We are not going to bribe. Does that sound easy to you? That's not easy. So how we started, the first one is sense of urgency. At the time, corruption was really, really hitting hard on Thailand. And it's not about $1 trillion US, which is the loss on a money-wise, but it's conflict. That is really something that creates the change of the mindset of many business leaders. That's how they got together. So 8 foundations, including Thai Chamber of Commerce, International Chamber of Commerce, Thai Federation of Industry, Thai Listed Company Association, Thai Capital Market, Thai Banker Association, and last but not least, Thai Institute of Directions, which is the secretary, which I work under, form team together and say, we have to do something. Accountability at the top. In many countries, business got together and say, we want to fight corruption, and they got together and they signed MOU, and they took pictures and they put it on a newspaper and they disappeared. We don't want anti-corruption to be cherry on the top of the cake like that. We want anti-corruption to be the yeast of the cake. By having it as the yeast of the cake, the board of directors of the company has to approve the policy on anti-corruption. They have to be committed to it. It has to be monitored. And those staff or those employees who broke the rule has to be punished. It has to have the compliance framework, a solid one. I've been listening to B Corp, and I can't helping myself seeing the similarity between B Corp and what we're doing in Thailand. We have this 71 checklist of how the company can prove that they have the policy in place and the system in place in order to prevent bribery within their organization. We borrowed this from UK bribery, the UK Transparency International. UK and Transparency International has 241. If at the time we borrow the whole 241, guess what? Not many people, not many companies in Thailand are going to be able to do it. And last but not least, like Thomas said, so which business is going to raise their hand and say, okay, I'm going to do it first, if they are going to lose their competitive advantage? That's really difficult. That's a difficult task. So we target the community that is more likely to embrace this concept, and that is capital market. It's obvious because company in capital market, you have to embrace corporate governance regulations. So this will go hand in hand with that. Not only that, we recruit big company first, because if we go to medium-sized company and ask them, they're going to ask us back, what's in it for them? What's in it for me? If I do it and my competitor do not do it, I'm going to lose the next job, the next assignment, the next bidding. And we also aim for cleaner sector first, like banking, financial institutions, because they are highly regulated. So today we have 264 certified company already. I'm going to talk about how to get the certification soon. Out of 855 signatory companies that signed the pledge with us, and by the way, this 855 include 264 already, and the rest has to be certified with us within 18 months. We need accountability, we need commitment from them. If they sign up with us, if they have a pledge with us, they need to be certified within 18 months. Now, how we grew? Because we chose to start at the capital market. And mind you, not only the capital market, we had quite a few multinational companies joining us. For example, GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, or like Siemens. So we work with SEC, Security Exchange of Thailand, and they were convinced that this is a great idea. So they asked all the listed companies, 600 listed companies, that you have to disclose if you have the policy. You have to disclose if you join CAC. We don't force you to join. We don't force you to have the policy. But if you don't, or if you do, you have to disclose it. Then we work with Thai Investor Association, and they are the activists on investing in good company. In good company. So what they did is they bought 1 share of all the listed companies, 600 of them, and sent representatives to all the AGM, annual general meeting, which happening at the same time around March, April, and asked to the chairman. They've been doing this for 4 years. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Chairman, do you have the policy of anti-corruption in place? Have you joined CAC? If not, why not? If you say yes, when are you going to do it? If you say next year, can you put it in the report, the meeting report? And next year, we'll be back to ask you. That was a tipping point for us. That made not the big company, but the medium-sized company within the stock exchange wanting to join us. The chairman, who didn't know anything about this project, this initiative, start asking, what is it? Can we be certified? Now, also, what we did was we asked big company that already certified to be change agent. By becoming a change agent, it means that please recruit your suppliers to be in this program. You are clean, but if your supply chain is not clean, what good is that? So they start to recruit, and that's how our number grows. Stringent certification process, I'm going to be talking about that in the next slide, but it's hard to get the certification. So hard that only 25% pass at the first time. Unlike B Corp, we don't have like passing 80%. It's just pass or fail. Sectoral approach. Many sectors are now using CAC as a platform. For example, the big company that want to clean up their supply chain, use this platform to clean up their supply chain. Pharmaceutical, foreign pharmaceutical companies, there are about 30 of them. And next week, we are going to sign MOU with more than 10 of them because they want to create level playing field. by create level playing field. They want to join us, and okay, so no one can bribe because we're in the same platform. Property development and construction, they ask us for help for a different reason, because this is a very corrupt sector in Thailand. They have to have a lot of approval, a lot of inspection from the government. So they ask that the government work differently, more efficient, quicker, in order for them not to have to pay bribe. Because if the government work quicker, more efficient, then the chance of paying bribe is smaller. Last but not least, we work with public sector. That one we call National Anti-Corruption Commission. Probably you have the same in France, but I don't know what it's called. And they are the prosecutor. And at the same time, because they joined UNCAC, they create this regulation that business legal entity has to be punished. It's liability law. So in order to pass the certification process, you have to complete the 71 checklist, as I mentioned. It has to be signed by a third party. It could be your auditor, or it could be the chairman of audit committee. You have to send all the related document for us to check if your document is in place. For those who want to be certified, you have to do it within 18 months after declaration. If you don't do that, you will be kicked out of the declaration company. And you have to renew every 3 years. And if there is a news on corruption happening to your company, you can be asked to leave. You can be asked to leave. This is the example of the Johnson Control, which is, do you know Johnson Control? Multinational from the US, very big. And they were very happy. Up there is not a real certification, it's a cake to celebrate that they passed on the first round. And next week, their senior compliance head globally is going to come and do another celebration, and this is their staff. This is how anti-corruption certification really mean to business society right now. What's next for us? Clean supply chain, SME, probably the same challenge as B Corp. How are we going to do that? They are smaller. They can't do 71 checklists. So we are creating 17 checklists for them. And we will try to do anything to accommodate them. Like they don't have a training program for their people, no problem. We'll create the instant e-training program that they can use. Citizen feedback on public service. I'm going to show you the video about this. If private sector is clean, but public sector is not clean, still not clean, what good is our initiative? We can now use SMS as a tool when we go and use the service of public sector. We can fill up the questionnaire like TripAdvisor. And all the result of all the public sectors, any branches, is going to come out. People can compare why this branch got 4 stars, why that branch got only 2 stars. Why this branch, people complain about bribery. This has never happened because people never trust when the government asks for you to fill questionnaire. But if the private sector like us asks, they would do it. Oh, this is another good one. Thailand Corporate Governance Fund, set up by mutual fund in Thailand. 11 out of 14 private fund, mutual fund in Thailand is going to set up CG fund and invest in only stock that has good CG rating and pass the certification of CAC and use 40% of the profit to fund project that is related to anti-corruption. So now we are talking about ecosystem. And last but not least, this is something that I'm here to learn from B Corp also, is how to convince consumer to support good business and good product. I'm going to show you the slide, which takes only 2 minutes, of citizen feedback, just to give you an example of how it's going to work in Thailand. Because if we put the spotlight on the business, but we don't put the spotlight on the government, it's not going to work. So let's see how we are going to put the spotlight on the government. It's going to take only 2 minutes. And then we have only more 2 slides. Sorry about this. There's an English subtitle.
ฉันเตรียมพร้อมสุดๆเอกสารพร้อมออกเดินทางพร้อมขนาดนี้รับรองวันนี้ไม่พลาดแน่น้องๆพันบาทพันฉลุยอนุมัติไว้ได้เลยนะจ๊ะเชอะยังไงวันนี้ก่อนเที่ยงต้องเสร็จโหแม่เจ้านี่คิวเหรอเนี่ยเย้ในที่สุดสวัสดีค่ะรบกวนด้วยนะคะ
เอาเรียบร้อยโอเคอนุมัติผ่าน
ฮะไม่ผ่านนี่ล้อจะเล่นปะเนี่ยทำไมฉันเตรียมเอกสารมาครบแล้วเนี่ยทำไมไม่ผ่านที่เจ้าพวกนั้นเดินตัวปลิวมาเลยเดินผ่านเอาอย่างเงี้ยหมายความว่าไงยะฉันไม่ยอมแม่จะร้องเรียนให้หนักโหยจะได้เรื่องไหมเนี่ยว้าไปดีกว่านี่ไงเธอร้องเรียนก็ได้กรุณากฎหมายเลขบัตรประชาชน13 หลักด้วยค่ะทำไมต้องถามข้อมูลส่วนตัวด้วยอ่ะอย่างเนี้ยต้องตั้งกระทู้ติดต่อราชการทำไมมันยากจังคะโธ่ทำไมเขาคิดกันแบบนี้ล่ะจะมีวิธีไหนที่จะแก้ปัญหานี้ได้บ้างไหมนะฮะข้อมูลจากการสำรวจ 98% ของประชาชนอยากให้ภาคเอกชนเป็นคนประเมินราชการจึงเป็นที่มาของโครงการสังคมดี2 นาทีง่ายๆประชาชนสามารถประเมินหน่วยงานผ่านทางโทรศัพท์มือถือง่ายๆเพียงสแกน QR Code หลังติดต่อราชการง่ายประเมินที่ไหนก็ได้ไม่ต้องเปิดเผยตัวตนเป็นกลางติดตามผลได้อีกทั้งยังช่วยสร้างการแข่งขันระหว่างหน่วยงานราชการทำให้บริการต่างๆดีขึ้นเพิ่มความโปร่งใสในการทำงานสังคมดี2 นาทีง่ายๆสนับสนุนโดย
Okay, so the last slide that I would like to leave with you is that if we don't do anything in Thailand, our business feel like all these small fishes attacked by corruption. But if we get together, large company, certification by CAC, smaller company by CAC SME certification, and also the citizen supporting it through no bribe label, which is to buy the product from good company, and citizen feedback, then that is going to be how the ecosystem of supply chain of anti-corruption is going to work in Thailand. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Colin. Let me now invite Stephen Fish to make his presentation.
That's okay. We're good. Perfect. Bingo. Great. Thank you very much, Thomas. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Fish. I'm in from Toronto, Ontario, Canada today. I'll provide a little bit more background about why I'm here and speaking with you today. But the center of my talk is really focused on these themes of trust and transformation in modern times and how that relates to modern bribery and corruption and just general bad practice within business. The title of my talk today is Trust and Transformation, Multi-Stakeholder Trust Amidst Digital Transformation. I'm working under the premise that right now we are at a systemic loss of trust across all levels of society, and that we're also going through one of the largest social and technological transformations at the same time. So I'm going to try and tie both of those themes together in my talk today and try and make sense of some of this. If you happen to be active on social media, I'm at SJRFish on Twitter if you'd like to stay connected or continue the conversation either during or after my talk. So why do I think that global trust is at an all-time low? I'll point to a couple of examples that you can research afterwards. We only have about 10 or 15 minutes here to chat, but there's a couple of fairly in-depth studies on this. The 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer, which has been running since 2012, for the first time this year ever, they've indicated that trust across all four institutions has dropped, including NGOs. And I used to run an NGO, so I have a problem with that. And I've run businesses, and I have a problem with that. I haven't run government, and they probably won't ever let me. But this is not good for society. This does not create a stable, sustainable business or policy environment when none of us have trust in anything or anyone. That's not a great place for us to start from. In this particular survey, Edelman asked a number of people unprompted questions, and 85% of the people they spoke to said that they do not have full faith in the system. This is a global survey, by the way. And that's a problem. Now, jumping off from that, there was a second survey, which I'd also encourage you to look at. Again, we can't get into detail here, run by an ad agency of all things. So I think that this is kind of an interesting perspective. So BBMG is a New York-based ad agency, but they work on purpose, corporate purpose, and they're very focused on sustainability, so this should be of interest to everyone in the room. But BBMG did a report called Brand Purpose in Divided Times, and they worked with GlobeScan, and they actually surveyed 16,000 people across the world from 16 different countries, and corruption was one of the emerging themes, top 3 across the globe that people were concerned with. 16,000 people, it's not a small survey sample. So these are sort of the 2 reports that I've been using in my talks and my research to kind of as touch points and references to say that we do have a challenge here and we need to reverse this loss of trust. We need to regain and rebuild trust in order to move forward. BBMG goes a little bit further, and they actually provide a bit of guidance for individuals on how they might combat this within their own organizations, inside corporations. They want people to take more of an empathetic view. They want companies to build messages around, brand messages around people being at the center of all of their work. They want people to build their brands around purpose. What is your purpose beyond product and beyond service? If you want to build an authentic relationship with your consumers and your constituents. Take a stand on an issue that's material to your business, and we can talk about that and what materiality actually means. And in some cases, start a movement. And this sounds like activist language, but there are many brands now that are taking a position that is material to their business. It's good for their business, but it's also good for society. And I think that this is a very fundamental shift in what was maybe acceptable corporate behavior 5 years ago versus today. So I was struggling to try and find a nice global example. Actually, I didn't struggle that long because I found this pretty quickly, of something that would touch all of us, something that we'd all heard of, something that was, kind of the largest case study we could possibly think of. And it was actually quite easy. I think that this Dieselgate and the revelations that Volkswagen was gaming the system around the emissions controls on their diesel engine was a revelation. And I think that in 10 years, we'll look back at this as being one of the largest single largest systemic breach of trust that we've seen. And I just want to, just by a show of hands, I want to ask everyone a question. Who here in the room believes that, because this was really just the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. So they originally were marketing their diesel engine as this clean, fuel-efficient, TDI clean diesel was the branding. And even I, who owned a diesel, was like, really? Clean diesel? Is that even possible? Oh, okay, great, sounds good. Let's buy a Volkswagen. But what we found out is that this was actually not just a Volkswagen problem. They were just the beginning. This was just the tip of the iceberg. And if you've been following this story at all, there's actually been virtually every company in the world has now been named in this scandal in one way, shape, or form. I know that there's been arrests and raids at a couple of the corporate offices here in France for Renault and is a PSA as well. So this is really a systemic corruption problem. Just by a show of hands, though, I'd like to see who here believes that the regulators that were supposed to be protecting our best interests and the environment's best interests had absolutely no idea that this was going on and had absolutely no understanding of the problem. Right, so the survey is correct. 0 hands have gone up here. So this is a level of complicit sort of corruption that we've never seen before. And I think that we will continue to study this example. Now, obviously, the A-B between marketing this is like not your kind of this cheeky Volkswagen marketing message of not your daddy's diesel versus we're so sorry, we won't waste your time, we'll solve this as quickly as possible. Very humbling experience, multi-billion-dollar solutions. And we'll see if it's adequate. You know, time will tell whether the response has been adequate. It's ongoing. I also want to provide another example where I was deeply disappointed with our follow-up. The Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh. That's the site 3 years later. There was a Canadian retailer that was implicated in this disaster. And when I was in my previous job, they sent me a note about a year after the disaster and said, we've been working very hard to provide transparency about our supply chain in Bangladesh and other places that you're concerned about. And they sent me a list, and it was quite literally a PDF. And on one side of the page, it had the names of the companies that they were working with in the garment industry. And on the other side of the page was the country that it was in. So what does that tell me? It tells me nothing. The only material piece of information I want to know from them is when was the last time you did a factory audit on the safety of that building? Because that was the revelation, is that what they were measuring about each of those subcontractors had nothing to do with building safety, nothing at all. And that was the revelation, was that, okay, well, we ask about gender parity, we talk about working hours, we talk about health and safety, but we don't talk about the building code, and we don't talk about the building safety. And so this was supposed to be a shared collective learning where the industry writ large learned from this and corrected their behavior. So a year later, as the executive director of Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, when I received this note saying, we got it all sorted out, you know, done. I say, nonsense, absolute nonsense. I want to see that you've actually done your homework and you've gone in and you've actually inspected these buildings. And that's not just a one-time thing, that's an ongoing measurement. So a little bit about me and how I got to this position. I used to be the executive director of Canadian Business for Social Responsibility. My replacement's actually here, Leo Rothschild. He's been on a number of panels. You may have seen him around. And really, the center of our work there was moving the needle away from kind of CSR change as usual, do less harm sort of language to, and this kind of like pinky swears, like trust us, we're doing the right thing. We've got this culture of assurance where we just sort of check boxes and say everything's fine. And I think that we as a society, and I think even businesses are starting to realize we need to move away from that. We need to move away from assurance. We need to move to proof. And that what I'll talk about in my talk in a couple slides is that there is ways of doing that now in an inexpensive, effective, transparent way, which moves us away from kind of the pinky swear promise that even my 7-year-old daughter knows how to break really easily. We have this thing we do now where if she needs to tell me the truth, I make her do double pinky swears, and we have to make sustained eye contact to know that she's not deceiving me. So this is, you know, I'm not suggesting my daughter's behind the Volkswagen scandal. I'm just saying we all have the capacity for deception, and we need to mitigate that. One thing I would advise you for your organization, whether you're working in a corporation or a not-for-profit or an academic institution, that your boards are still hearing the words risk, and brand managers hear the word reputation. And that whether you find that cold and callous, that that's how they measure themselves and what they're concerned with, and that they should be focused on environmental and social impact as the beginning, is that's your way in the door. If you want to try and motivate your board or motivate the executive leadership of your organization to make effective change, you need to speak their language. and you need to frame what you're talking about in the terms of risk and reputation. And that's just kind of pro tip from pushing a boulder uphill for the last 15 years. I do think that we're also in a culture of challenges with trust marks and certifications. I'm not anti-trust marks and certifications. I'm saying we're in a challenging time for them for a couple of reasons. As consumers, when I walk into a grocery store and I stand in front of the cookie shelf, there, from everything Rainforest Alliance, whether it's fair trade, there is a number of certifications, organic certifications that are popping out at you. We know from consumer market research that you as a consumer have about 5 seconds to make that decision. And in those 5 seconds, you're going to make a decision about the ethical properties of that product. You're going to make a decision about whether you like the branding and whether you like the price, whether you like the flavor. But all of those discussions are going on inside your head in about a matter of 5 seconds. So as a marketer, as a business leader, as an NGO who cares about these issues, how do you present your case in less than 5 seconds? Obviously, there's a lot of lead up. You can do some marketing to try and emphasize what you do. But for busy moms and dads at the superstore trying to make decisions on consumer products, for example, in a quick, timely fashion, this is challenging. The individuals that bought Volkswagen spent a lot of time and research before they bought their TDI because they thought, you know what, this is the next generation, I'm going to save on fuel economy. These people feel deceived in a way that we've yet to fully understand. I also think that from a corporate perspective, not to let everybody off the hook, but I do think that we're in the midst of a bit of a CSR reporting burden cycle right now, where we're asking companies to report on a great deal of information. Most of what we know now, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board in the US suggests that about 80 to 85% of what we report on companies' behavior and activities is completely immaterial, has absolutely nothing to do with their business, their activities, and their real impacts. So what I'm suggesting is that if we're going to do trust marks and certifications, we're going to ask people to disclose information, let's disclose real data, real information in real time. The second sort of experience that I'm drawing from is a company that I founded and just exited recently is called Consensus. And we are a distributed ledger technology focused on supply chain. And our use case was a supply chain project in the Congo. So one of the most challenging supply chains in the world is the Congolese artisanal gold supply chain. And following that gold as it travels from the miners themselves in those communities through the comptoirs and the exporters in the States, all the taxation challenges, it touches so many hands and there's so much paperwork. There was a tome of information just to import an ounce of gold in order for us to do this in a most ethical way. So we set out to see if we could create a system using technology that provide absolute transparency on every step from when the gold was pulled from the ground through all of those steps and all of those actors to the retail shop. So as a consumer, you could say, I need to know the story behind this gold. Great. How much do you want to know? Because we've got it all. And that's where I think we need to be moving to. Again, that moves us away from trust marks as assurance to trust marks as the fact that you're willing to present. I'm not saying that that can't be gamed. I'm not saying that that can't be manipulated. I'm just saying if you want to report the number one, bring that from the source rather than sending that through some other entity. And I'll explain a little bit how that technology can work. So this was the Jeffrey Simpson, who's the African bureau chief, wrote this article about our system in the Globe and Mail. This was the conflict gold system that we had pioneered in the Congo. This is an ongoing project in partnership with Partnership Africa Canada, and you'll probably read and see more about this as this grows, and more artisanal miners are able to compete with the big guys, providing full disclosure and transparency about their activities. So this also provides confidence for the market to invest in underserved markets by providing a leveling playing field. The folks in the Congo can't do a GRI report on their activities. That's not going to happen. But we can use simple, inexpensive technology to report on the activities from the field and provide those to the market so they can make informed decisions about what happens next. So Jeffrey Simpson, the bureau chief from the Globe and Mail for Africa, also wrote this really interesting piece on Tanzania. So Barrick Gold, which is a Canadian mining company, they're operating in Tanzania through a subsidiary, and they're currently in a bit of a conflict, let's say. So we want to talk about what's the cost of corruption right now. Barrick claims that they're losing about $1 million a day in this example. And the reason they think they're losing $1 million a day is that nobody can get their act straight. The government, the miners, the company, and their partners don't believe each other. There's an absolute zero trust environment going on where the government says you're not disclosing how much you're actually pulling from the ground in gold, so we're not getting our tax money. The partners say, no, 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 this is how much we're taking out of the ground. There's no more than that. The miners are saying, keep us out of it, just make sure we get paid and don't close the mine. And obviously the partners are kind of stuck in the middle. Consumers are confused, the market's confused. And so they're caught in this really difficult discrepancy in the reporting of the gold volumes and the related taxes that would be the benefit to the community. So I'll touch on that again. I just want to provide a bit of context. So I think overall, for us as consumers and as business leaders and leaders of other organizations, that the expectations have changed dramatically for what types of information we share and how. And in this social media-enabled environment, that our expectations for information is growing pretty exponentially. And that I think we are moving very quickly to an always-on monitoring system where doing an annual report will be a fairly dusty tome versus real-time disclosure of what's happening inside a factory, real-time disclosure of what's happening inside a manufacturing facility, and that there are new technological ways that are becoming more effective to do that at a low cost as we move to radical transparency. It's kind of a show me, don't tell me scenario is really where I think people are going to. So this photograph I took actually before I left from Toronto. This is a variety store just down the street from me. It's not a very nice place. It's not a fancy variety store. It's just one of those dusty places you get a bag of chips and pop and feel bad about yourself. And what I wanted to point out that there's a Bitcoin vending or Bitcoin ATM machine in this rather dingy variety store, which I thought was kind of fascinating. And I thought that was kind of a sign to me that these themes of digital transformation are now mainstream. And this is not sort of like, oh, maybe we'll see. We'll kind of take a wait and see approach to this. This is happening in real time. And so you're hearing a lot about blockchain and distributed ledger technology and the ability to create an immutable ledger of activities. So in the example I provided of a Partnership Africa-Canada and the gold supply chain, we were using a similar approach, a distributed ledger where as gold was being pulled from the ground, that information was written to a ledger. And that can't be changed. Somebody could change the amount and say that it was less than it was, but it would be recorded. You would see that change. And that we connected the miners with the comptoirs, with the exporters, with the state, with ourselves, and we all share this one. It's like sharing a spreadsheet, right? You're sharing a spreadsheet, only the changes are seen, the edits are seen. And so there's full transparency about any manipulation and changes that have happened in that supply chain. And this is where we need to be moving to. And blockchain will enable that. Blockchain is one way, that's distributed ledger technology is the term we use. The Internet of Things, of course, everything being connected. Mining companies are using this for their trucks. They can now predict a failure in a multi-$100,000 vehicle before it even happens to save money on downtime. And there's lots of creative ways we can think about how we can connect our toaster. Yes, we can connect our toaster to the internet if it's really important, but there are many other things, including social and environmental impact statements that could be drawn using Internet of Things, sensors, and technology. And the important thing is that the cost of that has come down dramatically. So implementing these solutions is getting less and less expensive daily. Again, cryptocurrency, that's why I put the Bitcoin sign in there. This also provides an opportunity for us to step outside of traditional economic markets and transfer value in ways we haven't seen before. So folks that are working in the community investment space, there's a way of pushing that value back down the supply chain and actually paying people or paying a premium, for example, if it's a certification standard, for example. There's a way of transferring that wealth. Artificial intelligence, there's been a big theme over the course of the last few days there. There's a company in Canada called MindBridge that is working with the Bank of England, and they're looking for fraud and corruption by scanning millions of documents using artificial intelligence, something that humans it would take them years to do, but they're actually finding some pretty scary things as a result of using artificial intelligence to look for anomalies in documents. And of course, advanced robotics, again, that was one of the themes that came up recently around the job purposing. So my suggestion is that we're moving from an old world to new world scenario. The old world is traditional data which in your organization, whether it's a corporation or a not-for-profit, is siloed. And certainly within the corporate space, the people that do CSR are separated from the people that are doing investor relations, are separated from the people that are doing the corporate risk ledger and actually telling companies where their risk lies. My suggestion is that in the new world, we are harmonizing that information. So we're looking at risk when we're looking at our social impacts so that those business conversations are connected to the impact conversations. I think that there is good business value in this as well, because you're seeing the risks, you're seeing material flow challenges, work shortages, stoppages. There's all kinds of things that can be measured here. And then in the end, you have this opportunity to take that data and share it with anyone. So that ledger technology I was talking about gives you an opportunity to say, if Greenpeace wants to know what's happening, share it with them. Give them the information. If your investors want another set of data, share it with them. And you can still control that. You can still put some security around that. It doesn't have to be sharing everything with everyone. You can be somewhat selective based on who needs what piece of information. We have that technology. That is not complicated. So I'm almost done here, but I wanted to press on and say that this is not about I'm a digital guy, but this is not about analog versus digital. This is not people being replaced by technology. I think this is very important. Boards of directors are still as grumpy as they were before. They still don't know how to use technology. I'm being a little bit facetious here. But they still need to see things from the terms of good governance. The ethics policies have to be in place. The technology will enable and empower us to do more and do better with our governance and ethics policies. It's not a replacement. And as Peter Drucker said, there's kind of a famous quote that's floated around, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it does. And even digital transformation requires human transformation. The culture inside your organizations need to shift and change in order for you to enable the digital technology. So in closing, what I wanted to say is that, sorry, one more thing. A good example of this is this idea of building trust and maintaining trust. I would look at some of the best examples of digital success, where it's Airbnb or Lyft or some of these technologies that are somewhat ubiquitous to us now. What they have done successfully is build trust. I know that when I order a cab using a service like that I see the person, I know their license plate number, I can even share my location if I'm worried about my own personal security, that I wasn't able to do if I just hailed a cab on the side of the road. Same with Airbnb. I know a great deal about the room that I'm moving into that Hilton doesn't provide me when I go to their hotel. So there's a level of human trust that they are building. Even though these are very high-tech solutions, they've managed to figure that piece of it out, that I use that technology because I have a higher level of trust. And what I wanted to leave you with is this, is that in the end, I would say we need to defend our personal security and our organizational security. I don't think we need to make those trade-offs. I think that it's important that we continue to preserve that. And we also need to be critical of technology. We just don't want to accept technology without challenging it. But we also do need to embrace it. And if we're going to embrace it, I think that that's our way to restore trust and build social and environmental impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Now may I invite Patrick from La Poste, France.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Alors pourquoi la Poste s'est lancée
Good morning, everybody. Why did La Poste decide to get involved into an anti-corruption campaign? I think this is valid for all French companies. We are in a country where a law has been voted last year. It's the anti-corruption law. It is the 30th law in France, because the 12 old laws did not work, because as we just heard from Thailand, our ranking isn't but good, because we are between the UAE and the Qatar. And since we ratified in 2000 the Convention of the UN, no French company was ever condemned for corruption fact. But in top 10 companies that most sanctioned in the world for corruption, we find 4 French-based companies: Total, Technip, Alstom, and La Société Générale recently. So we need to be in accordance, in order with this French law. We need to lead by example. Second reason, and Stephen just said it before, with the social networks, the data, the alerters, the whistleblowers, nothing remains hidden very long. We see it in everyday life.
Troisième raison de mettre en place un plan de prévention de la corruption, se prémunir
we need to prevent against national laws from other countries, like especially from Anglo-Saxon countries, that are national laws against corruption. However, they have an extraterritorial reach. And Airbus is an example, and it enables the US to protect their own companies and let them gain markets or bidding processes and to buy to a good price European companies like Alstom. You could watch the very nice podcast, in podcast, the documentary on the Droit de Savoir program, stating how between General Electric and Siemens, for the bidding process in Alstom, the American played on their own legislation to gain the cake. And Alstom obviously did have a problem with corruption in a certain case, and the director or the responsible person for on the US side phoned and said, you were corrupt on the Budapest metro, you have a link to the US, hence we are going to sue you, and it'll cost at least $1 billion. However, if you can be, you accept to be bought by General Electric, you will not have to pay. Alstom was bought by General Electric, and the same happens between Boeing and Airbus at the moment. So we need to be careful against national laws too. We are present as La Poste in the whole world with other brands. We have 30,000 staff on the 5 continents. We are in competition with US companies, and we are very careful not to be corrupt and not to be able to be put under pressure. And the intention of corruption counts, even if you do not really corrupt up to the end. If you have the intention, you can be sanctioned. And the fees are very high. It's several 100,000 euros, even in billion levels, as it happens to Siemens a couple of years ago, because you need to pay the tribunals, the different executive, the executive directors were all fired, and then there is a lot of reputation. And your ethic behavior has an influence, a growing influence on the extra financial notation. It enables the credit givers to fix the interest rates. And it is important to have a good ranking, and some investors, potential investors, will then join your company or not. Ethics are important, and the prevention of corruption accounts, depending on the notation agencies, to a high range. Last but not least, set up an anti-corruption plan around the idea that there's a virtuous circle. I am ethical, I have an ethic behaviors in my relationships, internal, externally, and I reinforce the trust of the stakeholders, especially my customers, and we know that the market economy is the market of trust. More you trust, more you are listening to the proposals, commercial proposals you get from here and there, and then your turnover raises and your figures are better. So to prevent yourself against corruption and setting up the real measures within your companies and enables you to be more efficient in terms of economics and financials and in terms of social impact. What did we do at La Poste in fighting corruption? We began, we started from 3 thoughts. Zero tolerance, first hypothesis. This is very clear and straightforward, I guess, because as I said before, even the intention can be punished. We are all concerned, number 2. Statistically, in all companies, it is very often the top management who is at stake because they have influence and power, decision power. But even on lower level, corruption is possible. There we had two examples in Post. A postman a couple of years ago was offered 300 euros by a construction firm to be able to access buildings and be able to do some marketing. Another one, 2,000 euros in order not to declare to TRACFIN some money transfer to a risk country. Corruption is possible at all levels, and even if we agree that in companies who have a relationship with public sectors will increase their opportunities of corruption by 50%, even if we know that certain professions are more at risk, like the purchasers, the buyers, the prescriptors. So we are all concerned, and certain sectors like the real estate sector are more at risk than others. In business ethics in general, because our prevention plan ranks within this matter, we are not discussing technical questions or legal questions. It is a question about behavior above all. In order to make sure that the ethical climate of your company increases, you need to sensibilize, you need to empower your staff, you need to inform your staff, you need to communicate to your staff and train your staff. We need to control the impact of your actions. At La Poste, we have an annual barometer showing through an inquest done by an external company, asking a sample of the staff at La Poste, measuring the impact of the actions, corrective actions you set in place, and the development, the trend of the mindset, their understanding, the level of understanding, the empathy, and the will to belong to these ad hoc actions. So it's important to measure regularly, and you are setting, you need to send internal audits and controls, beginning by an inquest, and ask different questions to different departments, and just making sure to check whether or not the measures, the anti-corruption measures, are in place or not. And then you need to set up an alert system that is known. Maybe first of all, people will not use it if they don't know it exists. It needs to be secure. In order to trust the system, you need to protect the anonymous of the. I am the guy in charge of deontology. I'm the only one becoming the alerts via a secure system, and the only one who can open the messages and read what it says. And as soon as I've got it, I change the name of the person into a number, and I protect the person as soon as I can. I call the person, the whistleblower, just to make sure that this person did not get any problem in terms of promotion, in terms of pay or salary or whatever. So we need to make sure the people are in trust. 75% at La Poste, according to a ranking, internal ranking, trust the system. That's 15 points more than the average of big companies. It is the fruit of the work we did in this regard. We need to facilitate the access to the alert system. We have an appli for mobile phones. Nowadays, you might be astonished. People spend half an hour more on their smartphone than on their computer. The smartphone becomes the #1 communication vector. We have an appli, an apps, where the postman or the postwoman can put an information, and it arrives on my mailbox. It's a secure mailbox. Through this system,
nous mettons en place un plan de prévention.
We set up a prevention plan, and we hope it is efficient. But there's never zero risk. There's always a little risk. There might be always somebody who doesn't comply, and if it happens, then when we are in front of the judge, there are two solutions: either you didn't do anything and you pay full-fledged, or you show what you've done in terms of sensibilization and so on, and the judge will be much more compassionate. This is what I wanted to state with regard to our company, like La Poste, the big company. We're setting up a prevention program in the framework of an ethic strategy since the year 2000. The ethic experts, or whatever you want to call them, they have different names in different companies. We are regrouped in an association. The vice president is the ethics circle of affairs, and all the ethic guys belong to this because we need to share experiences, our know-how, in order to know. In order to make sure that all the companies in France are more presentable as they were a couple of years ago. A little story to the end. In the year 2000, it's only 70 years ago, and it's nothing for the lifespan of a company. The companies were able officially to declare to the finance minister in a specific office in Paris the sum they'd given to corruption and bribes, and they were deducted to the taxes. This is where we stood in the year 2000 before we signed the convention from the OCDE. So we still have a long way to go. We need to make sure that our country joins the first ranking places of the international ranking, and we need to make sure that all these our friends from Qatar and other UAE are left behind, because as of now we are ranked between the two states. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you. I think since time is running out, I would suggest that we will ask, is there any questions from the floor? Anybody wants to ask any questions or make any comments? Let me just take a raise of hand. Raise your hands. No? Okay. Yes? Only one? Is there anyone else? Two? And three. I hear you, three. So why don't we take these three questions, and then it's because we just got run out of time. One here, two, and three. One, okay, please give to this lady in the front.
Sir. Lady first.
Shh. You attracted my attention first, so you number one. Number two, number three.
Bonjour, Léna Caravalli du cabinet des Anges et des Hommes.
I am from the agency Angels and Men. Thank you very much for your intervention as La Poste. We are working consulting in ethics, and we think it is very important that the staff know the systems that exist in order to be able to whistle. Above all, in order to make sure that in their behavior they live the commitment of your company. But if the staff do not translate it in your behaviors, it's not useful. When you're talking about your ethic system, do you cover or do you invite the staff to show in cases of corruption or other type of corruption? I would like to know what is covered through this whistleblowing system, and to know your concept. Are there other ethical behaviors you cover? Well,
yeah, number three. That's number three. Number two is some. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering the easy feedback system that's been introduced in the government offices. How much resentment do you get from the staff in the local office? Do they feel that there might be a source of income that's taken away from them, or is there, how easy is the integration?
Okay, thank you. And number 3?
Yes. Mr. Fish, earlier you said that technologies such as Bitcoin you were talking about the impact of technology to make corruption harder. But don't you think that things such as Bitcoin make it actually easier because it's untraceable? So I might not phrase that correctly, but don't you think technologies such as Bitcoin make corruption easier because they're harder to trace?
Thank you. Now, may I just ask you all to try and answer the questions relevant to you? Maybe Patrick, please.
Oui, donc pour répondre à votre question, évidemment, j'ai mis un peu
To answer your question, I highlighted corruption because this is what we're talking about nowadays. It is the Sapin law was voted last year, 2016, and it should be ratified since 2017. But the corruption agencies had needed time to exist and they're beginning to control, and they set up a list of 10 companies they're going to control as a priority in the next couple of weeks and months. Nobody knows who that is, who those companies are. This is why I highlighted corruption. The whistleblowing system at La Poste covers all different kinds of subjects you spoke about, even if for organizational matters, it is treated separately from other sectors. Intrinsically, the CSR is bothered by that. It's part of the CSR in any company, ethics. So we take up on all issues except sexual and moral harassment, which is an extra line in La Poste.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understand your question. Can you repeat?
If I get the question is whether the civil servants and people in government, when you have this system of reporting, what's the reaction of them? Are they unhappy that there are potential loss of income?
Okay.
And, did I capture it correctly?
Sure. Okay. This is the pilot project, right? So we do it for 1 month. Just ended 3 days ago. Okay. So we don't know their reaction yet because we have not put it back to them. But it seems like they are very accommodating when we talk to them at the first time. They were wondering, like, one of the questions that they share with us is that the feedback that they did originally, the result was quite good. But how come people complain about them? So they just want to know the real result, what's going on. So they were hoping that this one can solve the mystery of what's going on. So to answer your question, I think there is a positive response from them.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thanks. The question was around whether I think Bitcoin will actually increase corruption or make it easier. And I think the short answer is yes. Yes, I think it will, and it can. Because essentially that's a market that's working, and it can be a shadow market. But I would argue that this is not entirely dissimilar from the way Apple does its taxation structure now in Ireland, or way many people for generations have done business in the Cayman Islands to hide profitability. If you're going to act unethically, you're going to act unethically. It's just going to become increasingly difficult to hide that, I guess is my argument. And that Bitcoin, yes, it can create a shadow economy or create this sort of opportunity to send money in a non-transparent way, not if it's tied to a digital ledger. If that is part of a corporate governance that includes a ethics policy that has a distributed ledger and a Bitcoin layer, so payments, accounting ledger, and policy, I think that is a much more resilient model than, yes, just saying, okay, just pay them through Bitcoin, don't worry about taxation. So that's not going to change. I think technology will not create different behaviors. There will still be people that will work unethically, but I do think it provides a level of power and a leveling field, especially when it comes to community investment and payment in remote communities and underserved communities as well.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or anybody want to raise anything else? If not, then it leaves me to summarize and conclude. I think the first thing that struck me listening to everybody is that how we have to change some terminology. The title of this session is Business Against Corruption, Creating a Culture of Integrity. But as I listen to all those presentations more and more, I realize it's not just a culture of integrity. We are talking about culture of ethics. That means integrity is honesty, but ethics is something more that it is a morality, knowing what is right, what is wrong. And also in corruption, dilemmas is measuring of dilemmas. And, you know, it's a matter of choices. Is it the right and the wrong choices? So listening to all this, I've got some notes here, and you find that there's a very consistent message around. First, the need to build trust. I think all three of them talk about it. Institutions, systems, companies to build trust. And if you have trust, and you have trust governments, companies, then it is the route to profitability, good reputation, helps long-term competitiveness, efficiency, success of business, all the good things. But how do we do that? So I've got a few thoughts arising from it. I think number one is leadership. I think there was a time when you can get tax rebates for paying bribes. It's leadership that decided that it can't be. So I think we have to talk about leadership first, that we need leaders who can both talk and walk the talk. So for that, I think for leadership, we don't just need leaders who talk. We want leaders who can understand what it is, who can live it on a day-to-day basis, and when people in the organization sees that the senior managers, the leaders are living it up, that is the best message, that's the best example for all the organization to go. The second point I think is we use the word ethics, we talked the word integrity, we talked about good governance, but what does it really mean? I think we need to know what are the expectations. And I think that's partly when employees or suppliers, what are the expectations of these words? So we have actually manifested in many companies through codes of conduct, policy processes, but we all need a very strong management system in it, where there's leadership. Number three, I think, is linked to all this. Throughout the organization, we must have the right people there. We need the right people with the right values, because if we don't have the right values, we'll have problems. And I think part of this has to be part of the whole talent pipeline for organizations. And I think we also need to make ethics an explicit part of every employee's job description, that you have to go and put there that you will have to behave in a certain way ethically and sign some things. And well, if you have the right people, then the wrong people has to be fired. You don't fire people if you just tolerate wrongdoing in the organization. I think you're sending a signal and a message that it's all right not to behave ethically. So I think we talk about ethics, we have to talk about. The other point, I think, to understand ethics, this is my own, I think we need to do, and all these people talk about training. You need to train people. You need to tell them what is expected, have events, seminars, messages, so those messages comes up. And then lastly is also to provide employees with measuring. You should measure and say, what's your level of commitment and things. So some of the companies do surveys, they do other examples to evaluate what are their strengths, where are their weaknesses. And I also think that finally, all the systems, you must have protective mechanisms where the companies provide formal mechanisms so that the employees can discuss ethical dilemmas, they can report unethical behavior without fear, without reprimand. And so you have to talk about whistleblowing, you talk about ethical counselors, ombudsmen, other organizations. But in the end, it is people who can tell you what is their dilemmas and report on problems. So this is a little bit that I took up. And I think we also know that you need collective action. It's very difficult for one company, one organization to do it. We need to create a culture or from consumers, from regulators, everybody to work together to achieve that. So we finally, eventually, the culture of integrity is also a culture of ethical behavior. And on that note, thank you very much, and I think you should thank all my 3 panelists. Thank you very much. And thank you also for being a fantastic audience. Thank you very much. And have a good lunch.